sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from the life you thought you want a house. She had the job. She had the perfectly filtered smile. From the outside, it looked like a dream, but on the inside, it felt like suffocation. There's a moment, and maybe you've felt it too, when everything around you is buzzing, people talking, messages pinging, plans stacking up, and yet you feel completely alone, like you're floating above your own life, watching someone else perform your role. She woke up one morning, stared at the ceiling and thought, is this really it? Is this what I built everything for? To feel exhausted, to feel like a stranger in my own skin. That was the beginning, or not of a breakdown, but of a breakthrough or storm out. She didn't scream. She simply stepped away from the noise, from the labels, from the expectations everyone had for her, and the even louder ones she had for herself. She left behind the version of herself that smiled when she wanted to cry, the version that said yes when every cell in her body was begging her to say no. She left the habits that dulled her, the people who dimmed her, and the routines that kept her too busy to feel anything real. And she did something most people never to do. She chose herself. She sat in silence. She relearned her own voice. She cried for days. She laughed at things that made no sense. She scribbled messy words in journals. She walked in the rain with no umbrella. She stood in front of the mirror, not to fix herself, but to face self. And slowly, piece by piece, she found her way back, not to the old her, but to the real her, a woman with fire in her heart and softness in her eyes, a woman who no longer chased validation because she'd found her worth, a woman who understood that walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. We live in a world that glorifies the surface, the job title, the house, the relationship, the vacations posted online. They become badges of success. They're easy to measure, easy to show off, and easier still to chase. But what happens when you finally get there and it doesn't feel like you thought it would? When the applause fades and you're left sitting quietly with a version of yourself you hardly recognize, that's the uncomfortable truth that many carry silently. Success, in the way the world defines it, doesn't always translate to inner peace. You can have everything, the career, the social circle, the curated life, and still feel disconnected or overwhelmed, numb. There's a loneliness that creeps in, not from being without people, but from being without purpose, without authenticity, without soul. Sometimes you find yourself ticking all the boxes, doing what's expected, fulfilling roles you never even questioned, and yet you're left with an H that says, this isn't it. It's not that the things you have aren't good. You start to realize that maybe you never really asked yourself what you actually wanted. Maybe you were too busy meeting expectations, too busy staying busy. You worked hard, pushed forward, kept smiling, and built something solid. But you built it on top of something hollow. It doesn't crumble loudly. It wears away slowly. You lose yourself in the noise, in the pressure to perform, in the constant demand to be everything for everyone. You wake up one morning and can't quite remember the last time you felt joy for no reason or peace without a distraction. The most difficult part isn't recognizing this emptiness. It's admitting it, because it feels ungrateful. How can you want more when you already have what others dream of? That question keeps you stuck. It keeps you performing happiness instead of experiencing it. But the truth is, inner fulfillment has very little to do with external achievements. Real alignment, real joy comes from living a life that reflects your values, your voice, your rhythm. And that can't be manufactured with milestones. There's no shame in chasing goals or creating stability. But if it costs you your sense of self, it isn't success. It's sacrifice, the kind that chips away slowly until you forget how to feel whole. Real fulfillment begins when you allow yourself to look beyond what's expected and start asking deeper questions. What makes me come alive? What do I need to free? Am I building a life that feels good to live, not just good to look at? These are quiet questions, easily drowned out by the noise of daily life, but they are the beginning of something honest, something real. Or there comes a time when the weight of staying becomes heavier than the fear of leaving, when the life you've built, no matter how safe or structured, begins to feel like a costume you wear rather than a reflection of who you are. It takes a deep kind of courage to recognize that what once served you may now be holding you back, that the job, the relationship, the routine, the identity, while once meaningful, are no longer aligned with your growth. Walking away isn't always dramatic. Often it's quiet. It's a whisper inside that keeps saying, this isn't me anymore. Even when everything around you tells you to stay, the world has a way of rewarding stability, of praising endurance, of encouraging us to keep pushing through discomfort for the sake of appearance. But the soul knows when it's time to move on. Leaving can feel like failure, even when it's actually freedom. It can feel like giving up, even when it's the most honest thing you've ever done. Because the truth is, it's easier to stay in familiar discomfort than it is to walk into unknown possibility. The mind clings to what it knows. It tells stories like, or you'll regret this, or what if nothing better comes? But deeper down, there's another voice, the quieter one, the one that doesn't yell but hums with truth. That voice doesn't argue or explain, it simply knows. And following it often requires the shedding of layers, of expectations, of titles, of images you've carefully created over years. You might lose things. People might not understand. You might have a plan, but you'll have something that can't be bought or faking integrity. Choosing to walk away means choosing yourself even when it's uncomfortable. It means trusting that your inner compass is more valuable than other people's maps, or that you're allowed to evolve beyond your past decisions. You're allowed to outgrow versions of yourself. You're allowed to say, this was right for me once, but it no longer is. There's nothing selfish in wanting more meaning, more truth, more connection. Staying in places that drain your energy or dull your spirit serves no one. Not you or not the people around you. What many people quitting is often just choosing a different kind of strength, the kind that whispers, I won't betray myself to keep others comfortable. There's grace in the departure, in honoring what was without clinging to it, in stepping into the unknown, not because it's easy, but because it's real. Sometimes you have to leave the life you've known to discover the life you're meant to live. And sometimes the greatest act of self-love is walking away from anything that no longer reflects your truth. There's a belief that choosing yourself is selfish. That's saying no, setting boundaries or changing direction means you've let someone down or become too focused on your own needs. But the reality is choosing yourself is one of the most generous, honest, and loving things you can do, not only for yourself, but for everyone around you. There comes a time when constantly giving, pleasing, adapting, and overextending begins to chip away at the parts of you that feel most alive. You find yourself exhausted, not from doing too much, but from doing too much that doesn't nourish you. And still you keep going thinking that selflessness means ignoring your needs altogether. But a life built on that kind of constant depletion eventually collapses quietly at first, and then all at once. You're allowed to pause and asking, what do I need? You're allowed to choose rest when the world demands productivity, or you're allowed to walk away from people who only love the version of you that sacrifices everything. Because real love, real connection doesn't ask you to abandon yourself. It welcomes your truth, the idea that self-care is indulgent, that healing is optional, or that peace is only deserved once everyone else is happy, is deeply rooted in a culture that benefits from your burnout. The truth is, when you choose yourself, you model what's possible for others. You show people it's okay to grow, to change, to take up space, to protect your own energy. You shift the narrative from silent suffering to conscious living. Sometimes choosing yourself looks like stepping away from chaos. Sometimes it means ending a conversation that drains you. Sometimes it's choosing a quiet evening alone over yet another commitment that leaves you feeling more empty than fulfilled. And sometimes it means making difficult decisions, the kind that others don't understand because they haven't felt the quiet you carry. That's okay. They don't have to understand, or they weren't meant to walk your path. And that means trusting yourself enough to walk away when it's time, not because you're running, but because you're reclaiming your direction. When you begin to yourself, you start to return to who you were before the world told you who to be, or you start to remember what makes you feel alive, what brings you peace, what makes your heart beat a little faster. You stop seeking validation outside of yourself and begin to find it in the quiet moments, in the truth you hold, in the decisions you make that feel like home. Choosing yourself isn't about being selfish. It's about being responsible for your own well-being, your own joy, your own growth. It's about saying, I matter. My needs matter. My truth matters. And I don't have to prove that to anyone but me. Silence has a way of revealing what noise works so hard to cover up in a world that is constantly rushing, constantly speaking, constantly filling every gap with sound and distraction, or it can feel unnatural, even uncomfortable to sit still. But it's in the stillness that truth begins to surface. When you step away from the noise, you give yourself space to breathe, to feel, and to reconnect with something deeper. The pressure to always be available, always be productive, always be seen can slowly disconnect you from your own essence. You begin to live reactively rather than intentionally. Stepping into silence isn't about shutting everything out forever, but about giving yourself moments of clarity, or where your own voice becomes louder than the ones to define you. Solitude doesn't mean isolation. It means returning home to yourself. Or it's in the quiet moments when the phone is the inbox is closed, and the world fades into the background, that you begin to remember who you are without all the layers. You begin to notice the tension in your shoulders, the fatigue behind your smile, the way your heart aches when you pretend everything is fine. Those details, those small truths, often get buried beneath constant stimulation, but silence brings them back to the surface, not to overwhelm you, but to heal you. It gives you the opportunity to meet yourself where you truly are, not where you're pretending to be. In solitude, you can cry without explanation, laugh without performance, reflect without judgment. You start to observe your thoughts, your habits, your wounds. And in doing so, you create the possibility for real transformation. The world might not applaud this kind of work. There are no trophies for quietly healing, but it's the kind of growth that lasts, the kind that anchors you when everything else feels uncertain. Silence doesn't mean doing nothing. Listening means listening to your intuition, your body, your spirit, or it means noticing what drains you and what feeds you. It means giving space for the things you've been too busy or too afraid to feel. This quiet space becomes sacred, not because it's free from pain, but because it's honest. It's where you stop performing and start being. It's where you stop fixing and start accepting. You don't need to chase answers in the outside. When you've created the stillness to hear them inside, you begin to trust yourself again. You begin to remember that peace isn't found in having all the right things, but in feeling right within. When you return from that silence, you return changed, not in the way others can always see, but in the way you carry yourself, the way you make decisions, the way you protect your energy. The world will still be noisy, still be demanding, but you will no longer feel lost in it because you've found your own voice in the quiet. There is a moment in life when the striving begins to feel hollow, when every effort to become someone better, more impressive, more accepted leaves you feeling more distant from yourself. It's easy to get caught in the idea that you need to become something different in order to be worthy, that you have to constantly improve, change, perform, or earn your way into love, success, or happiness. But the truth is, you're not here to create a version of yourself that pleases everyone else. You're here to uncover the version of you that was always real, or always enough, always waiting to be remembered. You weren't meant to fabricate your identity. You were meant to find it buried layers of pressure, fear conditioning, and noise. Or this journey isn't about building a brand. It's about removing the mask, the one you wear when you're trying to be agreeable, the one that smiles when you're tired, or the one that says yes when your whole body wants to say no. All these layers might make you feel accepted for a while, but eventually they start to crack, or they don't hold up in the weight of real life, of real emotions, of real truth. That's when the unraveling begins, not as a crisis, but as a homecoming. Piece by piece, you begin to strip away everything that doesn't feel true. You stop measuring your worth by how busy you are or how much others approve of you. You stop chasing validation like it's oxygen. Instead, you start asking deeper questions and who am I beneath all this striving? What do I value when no one is watching? What does my soul actually need? When you start finding yourself, you realize that you were never truly lost. You were simply buried under expectations, some placed on you by the world, some you placed on yourself. You start to remember the version of you that laughed freely, deeply, and moved through the world without apology. That version isn't gone. She's just waiting for you to return. You reconnect with her by slowing down, by being honest, by letting go of roles that no longer fit. You don't need to become louder to matter, or you don't need to hustle harder to prove anything. You just need to be who you are when the pressure drops away. What you discover is that you are far more whole than you realized, that your softness is strength, that your sensitivity is not a flaw, but a compass, that your story, every messy, beautiful, unpolished part of it, is enough. You begin to live not from a place of needing to be seen, but from a place of truly seeing yourself. And from there, everything changes, not because the world suddenly understands you better, but because you no longer need it to. You're not trying to fit into a mold. You're building a life around your truth, and that truth is more than enough. There are times in life when things fall apart without warning. Plans crumble, relationships shift, identities you clung to no longer feel true. And the life you once held together begins to dissolve in front of you. It can feel like failure. It can feel like the end of something solid. But more often than not, what feels like a breakdown is actually the beginning of something far deeper, something more honest and raw. In those moments, or when everything feels uncertain and you're questioning who you are and you're going, that's where real clarity begins to emerge. It doesn't arrive with answer or certainty. It arrives as stillness, as the quiet realization that maybe the breaking is necessary because the version of life you were clinging to wasn't hold who you're becoming. Growth doesn't always look graceful. Sometimes it looks like crying in your car or sitting in silence because you have no words left. Sometimes it means grieving things you thought you wanted, or letting go of versions of yourself that kept you safe, but also small. The world teaches us that strength looks like composure, like always having it together. But real strength often looks like surrender, like admitting you don't know the next step, but trusting that one will appear when it's time. You stop pretending. You stop rushing to fix. You stop trying to make your life look presentable to others and instead focus on making it feel bearable to you. When everything falls apart, it's as if the universe is stripping away the noise so you can finally hear yourself again. You begin to ask the questions you once avoiding. What do I truly want? What am I afraid to feel? What have I been running from? And even though the answers don't come all at once, just asking them begins to shift something. Pain has a way of breaking open the heart so the light can get in. It's in the depths of those painful moments that you begin to see what really matters. Not the achievements, not the approval, not the image you've built, but the quiet truths you've buried for too long. Breakdowns teach you to be gentle with yourself. They show you that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's realness, that asking for help is a form of courage, that rest is necessary, and feeling lost isn't a sign you failed, it's a sign that your old map no longer fits where you're going. By bit through the process of unlearning, grieving and healing, you start to rebuild. But this time it's different. You're not building based on expectation. You're building based on truth. You choose slower, softer, more intentionally. You no longer need to prove anything. The life you begin to create is smaller in some ways, but fuller, richer, more rooted, or because it's finally based on who you really are, not on who you thought you were supposed to be. And somehow through all the chayas, you start to realize this isn't where it ends. This is where it truly begins.